Welcome back to Combat Mission Shock Force 2, where we're going to take a quick look at Syrian motor rifle platoons. I've already covered this in the distant past, but they're getting an outing in the Platoon Patrol series, so it's worth giving them a bit of a refresh. Specifically, in this video we're going to cover regular mechanized infantry in BMPs, referred to in Shock Force as Mech Infantry (BMP). At squad level, the basic infantry weapon is the AKMS, so the folding stock version of the 7.62x39 AKM. Obviously, the folding stock is useful for mechanized infantry who have to handle their weapons inside some very cramped vehicles. Squads are 7 men strong, 5 of them carry the AKs, 1 carries a PKM general purpose machine gun, and the last one carries an RPG-7. The PKM fires 7.62x54R, that's a full power rifle cartridge, unlike the intermediate cartridge used by the AK, so they're not ammo compatible despite the fact that they're both 7.62. At squad level, the PKM is operating in the light role, so it has a bipod but no tripod for the sustained role. The RPG is specifically the RPG-7V1. This is a reloadable tube firing PG-7V single-stage heat and OG-7V high-explosive rockets. Notably, they don't have the PG-7VR with the tandem warhead capable of effectively tackling explosive reactive armor. Despite that, the RPG is a serious threat to NATO light vehicles, most IFVs, and even tanks in enough volume and from the right angles, plus it also makes a mess of infantry. In Shock Force it has an arming distance of 20 meters and a maximum range of 600. Each squad carries 1,140 rounds of 7.62x39 for the AKMs, 400 rounds of 7.62x54R for the PKM, plus 4 heat and 2 HE rockets for the RPG. There are 3 squads in a platoon. The platoon HQ is not a separate entity. The platoon leader is embedded in the first squad. In the regular mechanized, he's an extra body, and the squad is 8 men strong. First squad also replaces one of the rifleman's AKMs with an SVD marksman rifle. It's important to note that this is not a marksman. Just because he has a marksman rifle, that's a specific designation in CM, which would give him a bonus to accuracy, etc. This is just a rifleman with an SVD. Uses a 7.62x54R, so same as the PKM, and the first squad has an extra 50 rounds for him. The platoon and squad leaders carry a pair of binoculars. Nobody has any night vision or body armor or anything fancy like that. The platoon leader apparently has a radio, but generally each squad is relying on their vehicles for radio communications. Speaking of, each squad is mounted in a BMP 1P, either the 4A or 4C variants. These are basically the same, the difference is what mark of ATGM they mount. For primary armament, the BMP-1 mounts a 2A28 73mm low velocity gun. This is very similar to the SPG-9 recoilless rifle. They fire the same ammunition and they were developed in tandem. It does have some high explosive rounds, but most of the ammunition is heat, which is very similar to the heat rockets for the RPG-7. So in terms of performance, thinking of the 73 as a giant, longer-range RPG is not exactly correct, but it is in the right ballpark. The 73 doesn't have the rate of fire and effect on target it needs to really effectively suppress enemy infantry, and by Shock Force's 2008, 60 years after the introduction of the BMP, it's well past its prime as an anti-tank weapon. BMPs do carry ATGMs though. The original BMP-1 carried the AT-3 Saga. This variant is still used in Syrian Reserve Mechanized Infantry units, but the regular Mech-Inf uses BMP-1P4As or 4Cs, which mount different iterations of the AT-4. These both have SACLOS guidance. The AT-4A has a range of 2,000 meters, the AT-4C fires a little bit further to 2,500, and it carries a slightly better warhead. These are both essentially just infantry ATGMs bolted to the turret roof, so the gunner has to open up to operate them. Again, these are relatively antiquated anti-tank weapons in 2008 terms, but just like the 73mm main gun, they still pose a threat against more lightly armoured targets, especially targets without explosive reactive armour. Finally, the BMP-1 also mounts a coaxial PAKT. In terms of ammunition, the BMP-1Ps carry 24 heat rounds for the 73mm main gun, along with 16 high explosive, 4 ATGMs of the relevant type, and over 1,000 rounds of 7.62x54R for the coax. So they're quite heavily armed. The downside is that BMPs are something of a glass cannon. They're proof against 50 caliber fire from the front, i.e. going to that very flat nose with the ridges, but they only protect against small arms in every other arc. Again, this was pretty acceptable back in the day, but NATO nations have had 60 years of iterating on ways to kill BMPs, and the average NATO infantry squad has plenty of ways of taking them out, from 84s to more 66s to 40mm HEDP grenades. Compounding this, BMPs are not very survivable. They carry a lot of ammunition, and the ergonomics for the crew and passengers are not great. The rear compartment in particular is extremely cramped, and it's difficult to get out in a hurry while the vehicle is combusting around you. The BMP 1P did introduce some smoke launchers. There's a unit on the back of the turret, so it will discharge its smoke grenades wherever the turret is pointing. These are Soviet-style smoke launchers, meaning they're primarily intended to enable maneuver rather than to protect the vehicle. So the smoke grenades are launched about 100 meters in front of the BMP rather than immediately around it. They're not thermal blocking and they take a little time to bloom. Again, we're dealing with an old, unmodernized piece of kit. In terms of mobility, the BMP 1P scored 505 in the vehicle mobility test. That's roughly comparable to the FB 432 Bulldog at 513 and a little worse than the BMP 2 at 499, which we'd expect because they're very similar vehicles. It's also amphibious, so it can swim water obstacles in combat mission, though I wouldn't recommend it if anybody is shooting at you. The BMP 1P has a crew of 2, a driver and a gunner. The driver sits on the left side of the vehicle next to the engine. There's a commander's seat behind him for the dismount squad leader. The gunner sits in the one-man turret. All of these positions have limited optics, both in terms of number and quality. The gunner in particular is very cramped and overworked, and any benefit provided by the commander's seat being filled is obviously lost when the dismounts get out. BMP 1Ps do have some night vision capability, but it's active rather than passive. There are infrared searchlights on the hull and turret, which are great when the other guy doesn't have IR equipment of their own, and generally detrimental to your life expectancy if they do. There are 8 spaces in the back for passengers in a somewhat unconventional arrangement. They sit back to back in the centre of the compartment, so they can operate their personal weapons via firing ports in the BMP sides. This is accurately replicated in combat mission, as is the comic inability to actually hit anything when the vehicle is moving. As usual for Mechanised Infantry, there's extra ammo in the back for the dismounts, 2,000 rounds of 7.62x39, 1,000 of 7.62x54R, and another 5 PG-7VL heat rockets for the RPG. So that's a quick once-over of Syrian regular Mechanised Infantry platoons in BMPs. There's small platoons with only 22 dismounts, the individual squads have a lot less firepower than their NATO equivalents, and their vehicles not only date back to the mid-Cold War, but they haven't really been modernised or upgraded since. How to operate them is more of a difficult question than it might appear. Shock Force's Syrian Arab army may be organised and equipped to old Soviet tables of organisation and equipment, but that doesn't mean that the army subscribes to Soviet or even Soviet-style doctrine. The kind of Cold War context, high-intensity mass conventional warfare envisioned by the Soviets is not necessarily very useful for the Syrians, whose primary role is regime security against internal opposition. In a sense, the opponent the Syrian army is most likely to face is the Syrian army. Despite that, the fundamentals exist. Each squad can be split into an assault element supported by base of fire with the PKM and the RPG. The squads in turn can be supported by the BMPs. But the squads are limited in both their firepower and their ability to sustain losses, and the BMP 1Ps are neither configured to support the dismounted fight very well, nor take a hit. In other words, their run through the platoon patrol is going to be very interesting. I'll link that down below when it goes live. We'll see if they make the cut. That's it for this video though. If you'd like to see content like this early and support the channel, you can do so via Patreon and YouTube memberships. Whether you do or not, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.